Sorry about that, babe.
Wow, can you believe it? I finally broke out of my cycle of constantly replaying games. That's right, we got around to playing Phantasy Star II. Sorry to Phantasy Star I, I'll have to play you for a third time some other day. Anyways, developed and published by Sega, Phantasy Star II was released in North America in March of 1990, and it is the second entry in the esteemed Phantasy Star series. My playthrough was conducted on my Mr. FPGA while utilizing the manual, included hint book, and some online references when needed. If you want to check that playthrough out, peep the pinned comment and description below. The story. Whew, man, this is a loaded topic. I say that because I tend to not spoil things. I've never been a huge fan of the complete game synopsis reviews, but that's just me. But before I get into the broad overview, I do want to say that this game is jam-packed with crazy plot points and twists, especially the ending. And when compared to a later release like Bahamut Lagoon, for example, and the reason I mention that is because I just played and covered it prior, Phantasy Star II's story and events are conveyed with much less dialogue, but it's just as powerful at times, if not more. The Algo star system serves as the parent to 3 planets, Palm, Mota, and Dezo. The history of Mota is the most troubled of the bunch, harkening back to the first Phantasy Star in the legend of Alice. Alice was the brave warrior who fought and saved Mota from the evil King Lassic. Sadly, that's not it for Mota, as now something even more sinister lurks. Everything is affected, even the climate. Horrible creatures now infest the countryside looking to wreak havoc and destroy. Could it be that Mother Brain, the computer system which turned Mota from desert to greenery, has gone bad? Well, that's up for you, the main character Rolf, to find out. And again, I really have to point out that I enjoyed the story and the events throughout the game. It was one of the biggest high points for me. Graphics. As I'm sure you could see, the patented pop of the Sega palette is back in full display. Everything is colorful, vibrant, and sharp. Many of the character and monster designs are done well, unique, and have that Phantasy Star feel. The few bosses that exist are also very memorable in their makeup. A lot of the dungeons in Phantasy Star II have a layer parallax effect that, for the most part, helps add to the mood and atmosphere, makes it a bit trippy at times. And as you could probably infer by that statement, yes, gone are the first-person dungeon crawls of the first entry in the series. The varying attack animations from your parties are also pretty cool and unique, changing with the weapons that you use. Another strong point for Phantasy Star II's graphics are the few cutscenes in the game and the various headshots that could display during said cutscenes, as well as in the shops, save area, and so forth. I do want to mention that this is a pretty early release on the Genesis, being 1989 in Japan and 1990 in the USA, so I can't be too harsh on it compared to, let's say, an RPG that came out in 1994 or something. But I will admit, coming from the first Phantasy Star on the Sega Master System, I did expect a little bit more here, but overall I guess there's not too much to complain about. Music and sound. Composer Tokuhiko Owabo returns to the fold for the sequel. So right off the bat, that's good news because I do consider myself a Phantasy Star OST enjoyer, whether it be the FM or the regular one. I mean, come on, that later dungeon theme? Whew! Anyways, Phantasy Star II's OST sounds like a natural progression from the first game. Much like the graphics, the sound feels very Phantasy Star-like, very Sega-like, and it's good. The random encounter music gets the blood flowing. The dungeon music is varied, for example, Advanced and Secret Ways couldn't be more different, but each effective respectively. Advanced feels like a progressing march towards victory, with Secret Ways feeling like a descent into the unknown. In the other dungeon track, Mystery, is just a synth powerhouse. Tracks like Violation feel like some climactic moment in an 80s movie, but as far as the sound goes, it's not horrible, but it's not good either. Kinda has that patented tin can feel to it. But at the least it is a bit varied and conveys what's going on pretty well. Pretty clearly the soundtrack outshines the sound effects in a big way. Controls. Not one of the strong suits of this game. It's pretty clunky. The town, dungeon, and overworld navigating is fine, generally, though some spots can be tricky as they appear to the naked eye that Rolf could slip through, but he can't. The vast majority of the game will be spent in menus, whether you're in battle, in shops, reviving, saving, overworld menuing, and so forth. And that's where a bit of the problem lies. It's just not super intuitive or smooth all around. I find that the text scroll on dialogue boxes is pretty poor. Lots of sentences will be cut off, or one word will be left on a line, which leads to some bad reading experiences. Menuing could also be a bit of a chore. For example, if you have to trade items between party members, or at its worst in battle, where in order to do different things aside from the normal command of either attack or defend, which is another topic I'll discuss, you have to choose a strategy function, and then manually go into whatever character or characters to swap them to attack, use an item, use a magic spell, defend, or what have you. And then let's say you want to stop using a magic spell, you have to go back in manually and do this again on the next turn. Honestly, the battle system kinda stinks in this game. Outside of the general fight command, which serves as an auto battle, it can get really clunky. Thankfully, the majority of the game can be spent slogging your way through with minimal micromanaging and just doing the auto battle. Gameplay and fun factor. So let's address the elephant in the room once more. The main difference between Phantasy Star and Phantasy Star II would be that the dungeons are no longer of the first-person variety, and are now more of a traditional JRPG, overhead or top-down view with random encounters. I'm gonna spare this from the critique section because that's very subjective. I wrestled with it for a while, and in general I am a traditional JRPG fan first and foremost, but I actually liked the mix that Phantasy Star presented with the normal towns and overworld exploration, and then thrusting you into a light first-person dungeon crawler. But aside from all that, let's talk about other differences. You now have party variety, 8 members in total, where you could use 4 at a time. Obviously Rolf needs to always be in the party, but you could swap characters in and out throughout the game. Because of the way that I am as a person, I kept primarily the same party throughout, but each member has their own strengths, weaknesses, and flair. Sadly, if you wish to flip your party around frequently, you will have to do some extra grinding, as to my knowledge there is no experience share type system in this game, so if somebody just joined and they're level 1, you're gonna have to grind them up. Speaking of grinding, you could probably assume that if you want to be successful, grinding will need to take place. Much like the first Phantasy Star, I didn't feel like it was overly excessive, and the time spent grinding didn't feel like a chore. Also, much like the first game, a lot of the grinding came down to wanting to get mesetas to buy gear upgrades. And also much like the first game, there came a point where I was all geared up and no longer needed meseta at all down the stretch. One of the coolest things about the combat in Phantasy Star II is the amount of dual wielding that could be done. For example, early on I was doing a lot of dual wielding knives and such until better weaponry came along. But even at the very end of the game, both Anna and Amy were dual wielding fools. Another note worth mentioning is the steal mechanic that the character Sheer natively has. Basically how this works is if she's in your party and you go into a shop or the baggage claim, when you leave there's a chance that her steal mechanic will kick in and she'll literally steal something from said shop or the visophone from the baggage claim, which I also made a short about if you want to see that. After stealing, she'll then return to your home base in Paseo, get her back out of there to rejoin your party, and the item that she stole will be in your inventory. This is actually a very important mechanic because it can grab you good weapons and armor relatively early to both use and sell. Super useful items like the Moondew and Star Mist, which serve as revives and party-wide heals respectively, and most importantly the aforementioned visophone, which allows you to save anywhere, where previously you could only save in the save centers of the towns. A huge quality of life upgrade there, especially given the nature of the game's dungeons. One thing that I think Phantasy Star II nails is the difficulty. I never felt like it was overly difficult, and I never really felt like it was easy either. Of course, I did do a fair share of grinding, which could offset difficulty in almost any RPG. And I'm also coming at this with an old school mindset where I'm not thinking I'm getting through each and every dungeon on the first try. I feel like a lot of gamers are very impatient and will mistake that for being too punishing, where to me and probably most JRPG goers, it's just a way of life. But yes, the dungeons can be very confusing, and the more lost you get, the more of a chore it can become. But on the whole, Phantasy Star II is a solid game, one that I enjoyed, but as always, I want to point out the things that grinded my gears. Critiques. Some of these issues I have with the game were already touched on because it came up organically in my review, but for the sake of documentation in this section, I'll mention them once more. I wasn't technically impressed with Phantasy Star II, especially on the graphics front. The first Phantasy Star pushed the limits of 8-bit hardware and blew me away when I first played it. Yes, Phantasy Star II is an earlier entry on the Genesis, but I was hoping for similar impressiveness, I guess, on the tech side and innovation, but I was sadly let down. Phantasy Star II is littered with menuing issues, whether it be the aforementioned text cutoff and awkward dialogue lines, clunky menu navigation in and out of battle, character limits on things like spells, for example a heal spell being known as res. This also bleeds over into the saving function where, to my knowledge, every time you save you have to navigate to end, where it's a few extra button presses, and I don't know how many times I accidentally started typing something and renamed over my save as AAA or something like that. Nitpicky, I know, but still annoying. Some quality of life things that should have been implemented into the game were being able to sell your items in weapon and armor shops, as opposed to just being able to sell them in the item shop. It really doesn't make any sense why you can't do this. I mean, I guess I kinda get it where an item shop would be a jack of all trades thing, but come on. Another one I encountered frequently was having characters like Amy auto-set to defend after turning my game back on the next day. Under no circumstance did I ever want her defending. Like ever. I always wanted her to attack or cast a spell. So that annoyed the heck out of me. And I would constantly forget to switch her back over to attack when I turned the game on. And that kinda reminded me of dying in Final Fantasy II on the Famicom, where the character would be resurrected and now appear in the back row every time, not being able to get off a good attack. And much like with Phantasy Star II in the auto-defend, it was something I would always forget to fix right away. Speaking of dying, sometimes to prevent death or eating unnecessary damage, you need to run from a battle. I mean, this is an RPG after all. And I don't know if I had the worst luck known to man, but my god, I could never run consistently in this game. Every single time I needed to do it, it never worked. Or it took way too long, defeating the purpose of running in the first place. This happened to me at the beginning, middle, and end of the game. And despite at times feeling like I was at a decently high level, that never seemed to matter either. In general, I felt that the battle system didn't offer much in terms of strategy, even in the final fights of the game. I pretty much just attacked with 3 people and healed with 1. I barely used any techniques throughout the game, unless it was of the healing variety. Now sure, this could have been because of my party setup, but I never really felt obligated to deviate from my average ho-hum path to victory, with the majority of the game being spent on the fight auto battle command. Now onto the dungeon layout and variety. I don't hate them, but in general I felt like many of them were too samey, and oftentimes featured confusing layouts and paths to the end goal. I want it known again that I played with the official hint book, which provided maps, but if you played through without the hint book, I could totally see this being a major point of frustration for the player. The dungeons also had very wacky difficulty/length factors to them. I felt like some of the dungeons towards the beginning of the game were more sadistic and grindy than some of the ones towards the end. The difficulty scaling, or pacing if you will, was a bit off at times for the dungeons. I was also pretty sad that there weren't more boss fights in the game. The journey was fun, the story was interesting, and the twists were great, but I wanted a bit more of a payoff in the way of massive confrontations, and Phantasy Star II lacked on that front. In summation, Phantasy Star II was generally a good experience. A challenging JRPG with decent graphics, a good soundtrack, fun exploration, and a very captivating and innovative combination of story and dramatic twists, held back by lack of technical advancements from the first entry, general clunkiness, lack of battle innovation, and from a personal standpoint, I preferred the first-person dungeon crawler style in the first Phantasy Star. Overall, I give Phantasy Star II and the Sega Genesis a 7 out of 10. It was a worthwhile experience, and I think it would be a worthwhile experience for any JRPG fan that hasn't played it yet. There are some truly insane moments throughout, but it's a little rough around the edges, and to me, it's not as good as the first. Let me know what you thought about Phantasy Star II in the comments below. All I ask is that you keep it civil. And if you enjoyed this review, please make sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you want more Phantasy Star 1 and 2 content, check out the pinned comment description below or the end screen. Take care.